Olympic City and the home of Pikes Peak. This is the Automotive ADHD Show with Matt West.
And here we are, rocking it on the Automotive ADHD Show. Matt West here, hanging out with you, talking cars. A loaded show for you today. Toyota makes the first new Toyota 4Runner in 15 years. And as we all know, Toyota can do no wrong. And so why change perfection? Obviously, this new model is going to be around for at least another 15 years before they change it again. I also talked to OBD1 Kenobi for the second, or rather the third and fourth halves of this show today. We're going to be talking about electric vehicles again. I know, a jaded topic. We're going to get to all of that and more. There was a Volvo that caught fire in Boulder, Colorado, just up the road from where I'm at, and it made some headlines, and Brian perhaps is the best person to comment at least on what the systems are like on these hybrid electric Volvos and all of that. So he's a technician. He works on them for a living. So we're going to get his thoughts on that and more. We're going to play some of your car sounds here on the Automotive ADHD Show. Of course, you can hear it across the world as a podcast right here in Southern Colorado on several fantastic radio stations. Now, that being the case, we have a few things I got to talk about here before we get to anything else. I want to talk about how, for one, this show, I want to make a big announcement. This show is going to be attending the Pikes Peak hill climb once again. Yes, for the third year running now, this show is going to be at the hill climb. What are we at on the hill climb? I think 102nd? 102nd. That sounds right. That sounds right. Don't quote me on that. I don't have it in front of me right now. The hill climb has been running a lot longer than this show has been going to it. But we're going to be at the Hill Climb Fan Fest as well. We're going to be having a vendor booth out there. Going to be doing the show live out there. And I have perhaps some special guest appearances I will announce later for that. We're mixing it up. A couple years in a row, we did the show live from there. This time, we're still doing it live from there, but there's going to be some changes. So, and it's going to be for the better. And then, of course, I will be attending on some of the media days for the hill climb itself. Some of the practice days, I should clarify, on the event. And we're going to talk to some of the drivers while I'm out there. Of course, Jimmy Ford. We are partnering with Jimmy Ford once again to have some amazing racing action with him behind the wheel. He does a tremendous job, by the way, and he has a new chassis that he's racing this year compared to last year. It's even more bonkers than the one from last year. It's going to be really cool, really, really cool, and can't wait to see him out there. We're going to get him on the show here now in the coming weeks to talk about that and get you an inside look at what's going on at with Jimmy Ford and his entire racing crew, which, by the way, is the family. That is grassroots racing at its finest. Jimmy is doing an amazing job. His family, everyone who's a part of it, really is doing some amazing work there. So now, before we get to a few other things here, I do have some other Pikes Peak news that I figured I would commentate on. Hyundai has been at Pikes Peak several times, and they've got an interesting thing. We're going to see a showdown between Lamborghini and Hyundai. Those are two very different brands. But Hyundai has the Ioniq 5N. It's a, really exciting sounding name. The Ioniq 5N, which is an electric SUV crossover thing. Okay. So they have said they're going to take that up Pikes Peak, and they're going to race Lamborghini and Lamborghini's Urus, the SUV, for the record of for the SUV record, you could say. And now this is interesting. Okay, electric thing versus Lamborghini. You know where my bias is going to be on this. Obviously, I mean, the Lamborghini has many more cylinders than the electric vehicle. In fact, the electric vehicle has none. So, I mean, obviously, clear winner there. But I'm only joking a little bit. Power to weight wise, this is going to be an interesting matchup. Now, of course, not as cool as watching Jimmy Ford rip around that mountain in his race car, but for production vehicles, because remember, with Pikes Peak, you've got different classes. You've got purpose-built race cars. You've also got manufacturers bringing production vehicles there just to run them in stock form or a slightly modified form. And Hyundai is going after this 10-minute and 32-second record that Lamborghini has. And their EV SUV thing, it does make some good power. Makes 601 horsepower. They've got a 641 in its launch mode, as it's called. And it weighs about 5,000 pounds, give or take. The Lamborghini Urus for this the showdown is 4,986 pounds. So basically, they're both 5,000 pounds, okay? They're both 5,000 pounds. And it has 657 horsepower. So the thing, though, that is interesting, that I think will give the Lamborghini at least a run for its money, is the fact that the Ioniq is, again, the Ioniq's this little SUV thing. I say little. Realistically, little cars now are the size of big cars, of previous decades. But anyway, they're okay. Same weight class, about the same power. One's internal combustion engine vehicle. The other one's electric. The electric one does have a unique benefit, though, we'll say, when you consider some of the challenges that you have on Pikes Peak. One of which is the altitude. That's one of the more obvious ones you have, the altitude there. I mean, the top of the mountain's a little over 14,000 feet. And even the starting line, which is still up there a ways. You're way below tree line at the start line, obviously. But you've got a ways to go. And even then, they say at the starting line, cars can have about 1/5 less horsepower than they would even at sea level. And that's just at the starting line. Now, granted, that's pretty much every car here in Colorado Springs. I mean, yes, we have we have less power here because there's less, the air is less dense, right? So you need that denser air to make more power. Now, where, internal combustion makes up for that is in forced induction, turbocharging, supercharging, things like that. The EV is not susceptible, however, to the altitude, right? The batteries really don't care, at least in this case, what the altitude is. But bear in mind, too, that it doesn't just mean you can run the batteries as hard as possible and the motors as hard as possible, because even an electric car is going to have some considerations, at least when it comes to cooling. You still got to keep the electric motors cool. They've got, little radiators on the car to do that. Of course, when you're at altitude, there's less dense air. That less dense air is also less efficient at transferring heat away from a heat exchanger, for example. But also just the fact that it's a long course. It is a long course. So you can't run that electric vehicle flat out the entire way. You're going to be near the end of your battery pack at the top, and you may even run out before the top. So as a driver who's managing that, they have to consider that. Do you push really hard at the start? Do you push consistent through the whole thing but still leave some room, or do you push at the end? What do you do? It's all part of the strategy. And that is something that Hyundai is going to have to figure out with racing EVs. And we've seen several EVs on Pikes Peak now for a few years, right? There's a strategy that works with these things. And that being said, Hyundai does have some good drivers, because they've enlisted the help of 11-time Pikes Peak winner Danny Sordo. They've also got a former Ken Block affiliate, Ron Zaras. Robin Shute is going to be racing with them. And I should clarify, I said 11-time winner Danny Sordo. I should clarify, 11-time winner Paul Dallenbach. I got ahead of myself there, reading the list of the standings there. 11-time Pikes Peak winner Paul Dallenbach, Robin Shute, Danny Sordo, Ken Block, Sordo, I should say. I keep screwing that one up. But that being said, all of these drivers are together, and they're going to be competing with Hyundai with some of this, and they're going to be using, again, some stock Hyundais. They're also going to be using some race prepped ones. So there's going to be a few different variants of this car that we're going to see. Look, I'll tell you from being on the mountain with EVs, the thing is you lose some of the excitement when you're standing there on the mountain and you're hearing the race car come, a mile down the road still. You're hearing it tear through the woods. You kind of lose that with the electric cars. It's like, oh, there's a car. Yeah, they have to have noise generators on them so you don't get hit by them, by the way. But I don't know. It's not as exciting, but we'll see how it shakes up. Gonna be there. I'll see it in person. I'll let you know what's going on. Keep you up to date. Hey, don't go anywhere. We're talking with OBD1 Kenobi later here on the show.
And now for how things work with an engineer.
Rotary engines. Regret.
And that was how things work with an engineer. More of how things work can be found at facebook.com/automotive ADHD.
And we are back here on the Automotive ADHD show. Matt West here, hanging out with you, talking cars for the weekend on the radio. Of course, you can also catch this show as a podcast. Really excited because coming up here after this segment, my guest, OBD1 Kenobi, Brian, he is taking some time away from being a full-time dad of a newborn son to come on my radio show. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And we are going to do a podcast exclusive with Brian as well. So you can catch his interview here in just a little bit on the radio, or you can then, well, I should say after that, you can go over to the podcast and catch a bonus interview with Brian. We are going to talk a little bit about standalone ECUs on the bonus edition of the show. We're going to talk about what are standalones, why I think you're overpaying for standalones, and so does Brian. And then we're also going to talk about engine tuning, modifying cars as a whole. Brian has a fairly unique perspective. He's a full-time technician working on Volvos, but he also runs his own business outside of that where he tunes cars and works on performance vehicles. So he's got a very, very cool perspective on it, and I think you're going to learn something. I'm going to learn something. It's going to be really good. Again, that is the bonus after this show, and you can find that bonus on the podcast feed wherever fine shows and this one are downloaded. Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, Odyssey, all of those places, as well as YouTube and Rumble. You can catch the video of the show there as well. So, Toyota can do no wrong, right? You hear me say this all the time, and I say this all the time because it is true. It is fact. It is, dare I say, fact codified in the founding of this country. Even I haven't checked, but it may even actually be in the Constitution. I would have to check, and they've proven that. They've proven that here. They just unveiled the brand new 2025 Toyota 4Runner. 15 years. It has taken them 15 years to make a new 4Runner. And some say that it was too long, that is clearly too long, that's a problem. They're too slow. I have to disagree with that, because you first have to come from the bias initially that Toyota can, in fact, do no wrong whatsoever. So, I mean, if you come from this perception, then clearly 15 years is not a problem. It is good. It meant that they went through every single little detail of the new 4Runner with a fine-tooth comb, making it the best vehicle, perhaps, again, in the world. Who knows? We have yet to see these on the road. But, as you know, I might be partial to Toyotas. I own a few of them, though, and actually, for good reason, because the car that's currently broken and not running and sitting behind me here in the garage is a Honda and not a Toyota. So clearly, my Toyotas run, the Honda doesn't. End of story. That's just, I don't need any more. I don't need any more evidence. I don't need, any statistics. I don't need a bigger sample size than that. That the Toyota in the driveway runs. The crusty Corolla also runs. And the Honda doesn't. It's boom, simple. I mean, you shouldn't be asking for any more statistics than that either. Really, that's as much of a sample size as you need. That being said, Toyota's 4Runner, interesting choice that they did here, right? Toyota's been this way. They take a long time to do stuff, and they take a more conservative approach to it. They look for tried and true things, and they don't necessarily rock the boat with any features, but they make cars that people like to drive. They make cars that have great resale value. They make cars that work typically as advertised. They do what you ask. Now, Toyota is manufacturing some cars in Mexico now. I don't know how I feel about that. Oh, wait, sorry. Nope, Toyota can do no wrong. That must be an important business decision, of course, to support the rest of the fleet of Toyotas. I'm not biased at all, by the way. Not in the slightest. But the 4Runner is going to be made primarily. They have them. They're making them in Japan now, which is good. And they have changed the format a little bit, right? And they changed, the design. It's a ground-up redesign using a platform that Toyota has developed for a number of its body-on-frame vehicles. Pretty much all of its body-on-frame vehicles use this same global platform, as they like to call it, the same chassis, the same, relatively speaking, the same sort of components. You got the same bones in this 4Runner as you do in the new Tacoma. It shares drivetrains. Likely the actual stamping and process for making the chassis itself is very similar. You're using very similar axles, control arms, springs, things like that. I mean, it's one thing that they're doing, and that makes sense, is you reuse a platform as much as you can. So you've got relatively the same underpinnings under the 4Runner as you do on the Tacoma, which that makes sense. Go back to the early days when it was not the Tacoma, it was the Toyota pickup and then the 4Runner, right? Or for my international friends listening on the podcast, the Hilux and the Hilux Surf, which kind of maybe are cooler names than just Toyota pickup. Just a thought. My first car was a 1988 Toyota 4Runner. That was still a first gen with the fiberglass top. The second year, I believe, that they went to independent front suspension, and I loved that car. It was amazing, and I think it's probably what's encouraged me to buy more Toyota products. But this Toyota 4Runner is interesting because, like my original 4Runner, which had the 22RE, mine was the fuel injection version. It was the 22RE 4-cylinder engine. Then we went to 6 cylinders in the 4Runners. Then we went to even 8 cylinders. You could get V8 4Runners. They've brought it back to the roots now. A 4-cylinder engine, albeit a little different now, a little more 2025 in the flavor of it. It is a turbocharged and hybrid boosted 4-cylinder. And they are touting some pretty impressive specs. It's a 2.4 liter turbo, 278 horsepower. If you just get the regular turbo version, so all of them, even the base ones are turbo. Clarify, the base ones are going to be turbo. The higher trim ones are going to be turbo plus hybrid. And if you get the hybrid, the iForce Max hybrid, that adds a total output of 326 horsepower in total. And a good amount of torque to go with that, too, they're saying. And I mean, obviously, you're getting the benefit of that hybrid, that electric torque, that instant torque to fill in the gaps where the turbo's not spooled up yet, to, do that sort of stuff. And this is how Toyota's approaching a lot of their hybrid systems in their fuller size vehicles, the Tundras and the Sequoias, which have turbo 6s with hybrid boost, and then the smaller platform, the Tacomas and the 4Runners here. And obviously, by the way, they're using the same platform as well for the new Land Cruiser. They're also using, again, the same platform, much of the same stuff for even the Tundras and Sequoias and all of these vehicles. I mean, it's a method auto manufacturers have done. Make the same car, give or take a few parts here or there, and make the same car like 5 times and badge it up a little differently, and you get different cars, and they have different features, and that's totally fine. Everything about that is good. Now, another thing with this 4Runner I can't really show you too well on the radio, at least, is the design of it. I mean, it looks unmistakably 4Runner, but it's got these bigger fender flares, these bigger arches. They're aggressive, but it also has a feature, the back window, the sloped back window, right? Not the very back window, but if you're looking at the side profile of the car, the window furthest to the rear, behind the back doors, has this kind of arched shape to it that goes over the roof structure just a little bit. It curves over there, a nod to the original 4Runner, which, again, I think is great. They're kind of bringing it back to the roots of that. Now, is it as light? Is it as nimble? Is it a light-duty truck like the original 4Runner? Well, not really. No, it's not. It's not. But likewise, I mean, this is what a light-duty vehicle is now. They're bigger. That's just it. And the heavier-duty vehicles, I say heavy-duty, like a Tundra's not really a heavy-duty. I mean, talk about a heavy-duty vehicle like an F-350 or something like that. That's even bigger. But even the mid-sized vehicles, your regular pickup trucks, they're huge now. They are big. And our big vehicles, things like the 4Runner, still feel big. But anyway, they've also added on this new 4Runner, a new interior. It matches very similarly to the current new Tacoma, which is kind of a scaled down version of the new Tundra. And you get the point here. It's all kind of the same car, but they've got tech. They've got 4-wheel drive stuff. They've got different modes, obviously. That's the one thing I'm not on board with too much with a lot of these modern vehicles, which is there's too many screens. The one thing this 4Runner has, it's being praised for it, in fact, is a gigantic touchscreen. It's a 14-inch touchscreen in the center stack. And I ask why? Why do you need a 14-inch touchscreen? Actually, why do you need a touchscreen at all? Now, the good thing is Toyota, on all of their products right now, they're really sticking to keeping physical buttons and knobs for things like the HVAC and stuff like that. Stuff that you use all the time. We've talked about on this show how physical buttons are really the way to go. I mean, they're actually safer. You don't even have to take your eyes off the road when you use them. You can use them by feel. They're sticking with that. But then they slap the 14-inch touchscreen on there. And should I get in a rant about touchscreens and stuff in cars? I think they're a fad of this decade. And it doesn't serve much more purpose than you could do with a smaller touchscreen or anything else. And even that, the gauge cluster, it's an LCD screen. Yeah, it can provide information. It's configurable. I don't know. I think a lot of 4Runner buyers aren't going to sit there configuring their gauges for half an hour. That's not what your audience is looking for, in my eyes at least. I could be wrong. Toyota's never wrong, though, just so you know. But I'm glad to see that they've got a new 4Runner. It looks sharp. It's got a good drivetrain. It makes good power. Is it going to be reliable? Yeah, Toyota is not going to invest all this money in this global platform that they use on all their vehicles for it to be unreliable. They do a lot of R&D. It's a huge investment. Their brand reputation is on the line if they start making unreliable garbage. And then because they're reusing platforms under the Tacoma, the 4Runner, the Tundra, the Sequoia, the Land Cruiser, they're reusing these platforms underneath there with different bodies on top. They're not going to make something horrible. In theory, yeah, you can make mistakes. I mean, well, Toyota can't, but other manufacturers can make mistakes. But I think overall, it's probably going to be people are going to get some miles on it. People are going to like the new platforms. The way the power comes in with these turbocharged engines now with the batteries, the hybrid batteries, is fantastic. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds and the drawbacks of neither. So I have to commend Toyota for doing that and not going to an all-out EV approach on this, which has its own drawbacks. And speaking of those drawbacks, we're going to talk about those and more right here after the break. You're listening to Automotive ADHD. My guest, Brian OBD1 Kenobi, is joining me in just a minute.
At the Speed Council, getting things done fast is our priority. We do everything fast, from driving, working, sleeping, and eating.
Someone help, he's choking!
This is Tim.
Hello.
And by the time this ad is over, he'll have bicycled across the earth 69 times. Nice. Even if our name sounds unfamiliar, you know our work. F1? Pfft, child's play. The world's first supersonic jet? Yep, that was us. Apollo 11? Also us. The fastest animal in the sea? Hell, we even wrote the Wikipedia article. Fast. And we're so dedicated to speed that we've genetically engineered the world's first hyperspeed speed machine.
With this scientific breakthrough, you can interact with and download your favorite automotive podcast a whole day early. How's that for fast? Learn more at facebook.com/automotiveadhd.
This message approved by the Speed Council and the Church of Fast Things.
And we are rocking it here on the Automotive ADHD show. Those were not Volvo 5-cylinder noises, as my guest knows. Those came from a 5-cylinder Volkswagen Rabbit. By the way, rally crossing. I didn't mention that. Rally crossing at the Pikes Peak International Raceway, which is very cool. Now, my next guest joining me here on the show, you're going to recognize him by his voice. He's been on the show several times before, and he is a new dad. OBD1 Kenobi. Brian, welcome back to Automotive ADHD.
Yeah, I'm old OBD1 Kenobi now.
Well, and like I was saying on the show last week, your son naturally is OBD2 Kenobi.
I guess so. Like version 2.0?
Version 2, right? We went from OBD1 to OBD2. So I think that just fits. So, but congratulations on being a new dad, and thank you for cutting out some time to be here on my humble radio show.
I know, we've been putting it off all week.
I know. Every time, I'm tired, I don't want to do this or whatever.
I got a headache.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So that being said, we've got some fun stuff to talk about because we're talking about Volvos specifically, and that is your skill, your trade is Volvos. You work on them professionally, and you've done so for many years. And we're going to talk about a Volvo that caught fire in Boulder. And why might it have caught fire? Did it really even catch fire itself, or was it something else? We're going to get into all of that. But before we do, tell me a little bit, and we've talked about this before on the podcast and in some of the bonuses we've done. Tell me a little bit about what the servicing is like on these new hybrid electrics and EVs. It's a different certification. You go through a whole program to train up on how to do that. What does that look like?
So essentially, we have it broken down into like 3 batteries, and then also I believe about 3 different certifications. It's been a while, so forgive me if I don't remember it specifically. But you have full electrics, which we have 2 vehicles of, and then we have hybrids, which we have available in almost every single one of our versions of chassis, I think. And the way it looks is the full electrics have their own certification for doing anything that requires touching the high voltage system, as well as a certification for touching anything high voltage on a a hybrid vehicle.
Yeah.
And then there's also another certification required to do any sort of basically battery repair where the lid has to come off.
Okay.
I can't remember. That one specifically, I believe, has 2 different certs. So one for the full electric battery and then one for our hybrid batteries. And then to break it down even further, we have 3 different batteries. So we have full electric battery. We have 2 different batteries for the hybrids. We got a 6-cell, and then we have a 3-layer, which is increasing the range on those, which is a new battery.
Okay.
And that's about as far as I can break it down for you.
Okay. Well, and that makes sense, though. So when we're talking about working on these EVs, it's definitely something you go as a certified technician, working for a dealership that works with these cars from the manufacturer. You're going and getting certified on this.
Yeah.
Right? You're not just, okay, I'm going to start cutting the orange wires and stuff.
Volvo's taken a while to get this all figured out because they've been revamping their entire tire education area, like for training up new technicians and all that. So all that has basically just been uprooted and changed entirely. And we've been in sort of a limbo for the past couple of years while they get that figured out. But as of right now, this is pretty much how they have it set up.
Okay. Well, and that kind of, I think, goes in hand with the fact that Volvo is a little more conservative when it comes to how quickly they're pushing stuff out technology-wise in ways like that. So they're not rushing it out. They're like, okay, we're not just sending this whole platform right away. Is that kind of the feeling you get?
It seems like they want stuff proven really before they use it.
Okay, that makes sense. And obviously, you need to have people who know how to work on it, whether or not it's a brand new car or for down the road when it needs services. Now, these electric vehicles don't need a ton of services. But you were telling me before that you've had to take the lid off the batteries. You've actually done some stuff in the batteries, which is news to me because I figured the batteries would be not touching it at all, yank it out, send it back, put a new one in, but you can actually go in a limited sense, right?
No, we can do pretty much anything on the battery, but it has begun to change as far as I understand. They are working on a facility where they work on batteries specifically, and the idea is that we'll be basically putting in a new battery if something is found internally wrong. But I think we've only done that once with a full electric, and only recently I've actually just done a lid off repair on a hybrid 6-cell battery, and so has my cousin. So we are still doing lid off repairs. I just don't know how long that will keep going on. I don't know what Volvo's intending. I think they're still figuring this stuff out.
Okay. Now, tell me a little bit about the hybrid systems themselves, because you've got full electric, you've got hybrids, but more than one type of hybrid. What do the hybrid systems look like?
So the hybrids are probably the most complex compared to just either gasoline or full electric, because in our hybrid vehicles, like our true hybrid vehicles with the 400-volt 6-cell or 3-layer, they essentially have both systems overlapped on top of each other. Mm-hmm. There isn't like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. No, the complexity is far higher. There is no starter motor on a hybrid battery or hybrid car. There is a ISG, which is a 3-phase motor that takes up space residence between the transmission and the engine, that handles regeneration from the engine as well as starting the motor and charging the battery from the gasoline motor. And then there's also a high voltage AC compressor. There's a high voltage heater. So there's 2 different forms of heating in the car. And then there's also obviously the rear mounted motor to project the rear wheels, which is also used in conjunction with the ICE motor so they can have all-wheel drive, or full electric pure mode where it's simply running on the pure rear wheel drive motor. And then the second hybrid, which I'll try to break really quickly here, is not like our other vehicles. It does not have a high voltage battery. It has a 48-volt pack, which uses a new style alternator, which is just a high voltage 48-volt alternator that can not only provide electricity from the car by converting it from the motor, but also can start the motor. And then they also have given us a 48-volt powered forced induction device. Is
Okay.
what the best way I can put it, like a supercharger, essentially.
Like an electric supercharger.
Yeah, I haven't
Okay.
actually seen one out of the vehicle yet, but I would love to because it sounds really interesting. But as far as I understand, it is only used to help propel the vehicle initially. It's not used in the full output of the vehicle.
Okay, so you're not like using electric battery juices to spool that supercharger up and create all the boost, essentially, right? You're not.
No, it still has a turbocharger, and it seems to be using the supercharger to essentially assist it.
Okay.
To get it off the ground, basically, just get the turbochargers going.
Okay. Well, that makes sense to kind of spool it up maybe a little faster and get
Yeah.
it to where it's being most
Because
efficient.
we are talking about a 2-liter here,
Right.
trying to produce 300 so horsepower.
Which is commendable for a 2-liter, I'll add. That is. So then, of course, aside from both of those, you have your full battery electric, your BEV vehicles. And those, are they any different than, a Tesla, a Rivian, whatever? I mean, is it just, it's motors and a battery, right?
I don't think I know enough about the industry on that side to say for certain, but I think every manufacturer is kind of going at their own route, but they are required to follow some guidelines to make sure that obviously like safety things are laid out the same way for like rescue crews and stuff.
Which is relevant for the story we're going to talk about.
Like orange battery cables.
Yep.
Anything high voltage will have a plastic orange loom over it. There's some other interesting features such as isolation and resistance checking the cables to make sure they're actually connected, and also that the insulation hasn't been damaged or damaged or shorted.
Right.
And other than that, I think the only things that really change is just the way everything looks underneath the hood. I would say that one of the most intimidating things on our full electric vehicles is when you do pull the front. What do you want to call that? The front boot?
I guess the frunk.
The frunk. That's what the joke is.
Frunk,
That's the
yeah.
joke. The front.
I think Tesla actually calls it a frunk. Like
Yeah.
in the infotainment system, you can push it says frunk on it.
Yeah. So if you take one of those off on our cars, you will quickly see that there is a very large HVAC system involved on these cars.
Okay.
Mostly because most of them that we see are being optioned with a heat pump, and the system is incredibly complex looking at first glance. The idea is that using...
Well, go ahead and finish that thought there real fast. We got just a second.
It can basically heat or cool anything in the car that's HVAC related.
Okay, gotcha. And because there's no engine to turn an
Using
AC
refrigerant.
compressor. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, don't go anywhere. We're going to talk about now a EV fire. Was it even the EV? We're going to talk about how that can happen, why it might have happened. That's all coming up here after the break. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Automotive ADHD.
Colorado Springs' #1 car show by default. This is Automotive ADHD.
Right. Hey, remember to send those car sounds into the show, facebook.com/automotive ADHD. Now, if you were joining us before the break, my guest is Brian. He is a Volvo technician. We're talking about electric systems in Volvos. We're talking about hybrids. We're talking about all of it, the whole gamut here, and relating that to there was a fire involving a Volvo, and we're going to talk a little bit about what might have caused that, but also in general, maybe what caused EV fires. And is it true that you can't put out an EV fire? We're gonna get into all of that. But Brian, so let's talk now about this story, which comes from just up the road in Boulder, Colorado, but it was making some national headlines and comes by way of KDVR. An electric vehicle fire caught fire and exploded in a home in Boulder. This was only about a week ago, and I'm gonna roll real quick here. We are going to roll a quick clip here. Go ahead and let's give this a listen right here.
Want to show you some new pictures that we just got in within the last couple of minutes about that electric vehicle fire at a home in Boulder. Fire crews were called to this house talking about an electric vehicle fire. Then once they got there, they said that at least part of the car exploded. We're not sure exactly what exactly happened, but it happened around 6:40 a.m. on Emerald Road. And you can see right there, the fire was inside that garage of that home. And we're told that there was an explosion related to that electric vehicle fire.
Okay, so coming back to this here, Brian. So what are typically the things that would cause an EV to combust? Before the show, we were talking about how it may not even have been the car. It could have been an incorrectly set up charging system. But from your perspective as a technician, not speaking on behalf of Volvo, mind you, just as a technician in general, though, what do you think are the typical causes of an EV fire?
I honestly don't know. I don't think I know enough about them in pure operation to say anything for sure other than speculation. I'd have to assume that it probably had something to do with thermals or some sort of mechanical issue where it would have been shorting, or a device failing in a fashion that would cause it to short or overheat.
Right. And we're talking a lot of times in the context of charging too. I mean, that's one of those cases where when you're charging, if you're going to have an issue, a lot of times it can be then.
I mean, the biggest concern in the full electric vehicle, or even a vehicle that is a hybrid that has a lithium pack like so, is that you need the battery to be monitored physically at all times. If you pull apart anything really that has a lithium pack in it, whether it be the little cells in like your laptop or a device, there's usually always some sort of a BMS, which is monitoring the temperature of the cell that it's measuring, as well as its voltage and current consumption, trying to avoid a situation where it's being shorted and having too much current pulled from it, or if the temperature is getting out of control, or if the temperature is not within a certain standard. On our vehicles, and I think most electric vehicles, the temperature is maintained not only from cooling but also heating perspective, using the onboard refrigerant. On our vehicles with the heat pump, like I was just explaining before the break, the ones that option with the heat pump, they can cool and heat the battery effectively, so that it's optimal in every condition. Because the only way you can get the best possible range out of the battery or possible acceleration, meaning the most output, is the battery has to be within a certain temperature.
Okay. Well, and that's one of those things when we're talking about EVs, and listeners of my show know I have an opinion on EVs, and, you should be able to buy whatever car works for you and makes you happy, right? I don't think the government should come in and tell us what we have to buy. But we saw this a lot with people in cold weather who are unfamiliar with EVs, people who are renting an EV, for example, and using it in cold weather. You have to precondition that battery when it's cold, right? Because there's an efficiency range where that charges best at.
Well, it's not even just charging. It's just the fact that the chemical reaction in the battery is only ideal at a certain temperature. So if you want to get the most output of the battery, it needs to be at a specific temperature. If you happen to get into a full electric vehicle that was cold and not preconditioned, you'll not only find that the range is depleted, but also that you cannot fully accelerate. Mm-hmm. You can stomp the gas and it will not accelerate very well at all. I think the way this is being handled right now is through heating the battery. I can't say 100% for sure that this is exactly how it works, but if you think about it, if you have to heat the battery, you're also using energy to heat the battery.
Right.
So your range is also going to be reduced, not only with the temperature, but also because of the fact that you're now having to heat the battery, and heating electrically is a lot of energy. It is very efficient, but it does require a lot of energy.
Right. Now, another thing I wanted to touch base on here, which is this notion that right now, okay, there was a Volvo hybrid, which the news was going around and reporting it as an electric vehicle, which I guess technically hybrids are electric vehicles.
Realistically speaking, our hybrid vehicles are as much of an electric car as our electric cars are.
Yeah.
It's just so complex.
But what I find interesting is, in trying to debunk this notion that I think a lot of people talk about, which is, electric vehicles catch fire. I've talked to a couple people who own electric vehicles, and they get that a lot. Like, aren't you worried about it catching fire? I have an interesting statistic.
Aren't you worried about your gasoline tank exploding too?
Yeah.
Like a movie?
The Ford Pinto just just called and and says there's a lawsuit. So
Yeah, they want their trophy back.
yeah, but so according to a study done in Sweden, this is where the data is coming from. Convenient, by the way, that it's
Sweden.
It's Volvo, right? Sweden, right? That's actually totally coincidental. I didn't plan that. I mean, obviously, I didn't plan the EV fire either. To coincide with this story.
You sure about that? What were you doing in Boulder a couple of weeks ago? No,
I don't remember. I have no idea. That time frame is completely gone in my memory. But there were nearly, according to this, 611,000 EVs and hybrids together in Sweden as of 2022, with 16 EV and hybrid fires per year. And that breaks down to a 1 in 38,000 chance of a fire. So you can assume with these statistics, and yes, they're just statistics, but 1 in 38,000 EVs has a chance of catching fire. Now, conversely, I'll just throw you on the spot. What do you think it is? Just throw a number out there for gas cars. 1 in however many thousand do you think?
I'm going to guess it's probably more than an electric vehicle.
Well, yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Yes, clearly.
I would say at least 10 times more likely.
1 in 1,300. 1 in 1,300 per the statistics in Sweden. And this included gas and diesel passenger vehicles. And they said this is 29 times more likely to catch fire than an EV. But how many times do we hear about gas cars catching fire? We really don't, right? We really don't hear about it. And I think it's because what happens is in the news and the media, it's story.
norm.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, my car caught fire yesterday. Did yours catch fire? Have you ever had a car catch fire?
I think you're absolutely right about the media. I already can see where you're going with that. In my own personal opinion, it's like there's so many cars being produced, like anything else being mass produced, no matter how good you make it, there's always going to be ones with defects.
Right.
And the problem is the number of things increases, the amount of defect ones will also increase. Even though the percentage may be a fraction of 1%, there's still going to be some failures. And the problem is with the news is as soon as you see one, you think all of them have that problem.
Right. That all EVs catch fire. Again,
but when you do the math, it's like you're more likely to be, struck by lightning or something stupid.
Right. Or when they talk about shark attacks, you know, everyone's scared of like great whites, but
it's a ridiculous thing to even think
about. Such a low amount. Yeah, and granted, right? I'm not coming out in flagrantly supporting EVs. It's not what I'm doing. Again, listeners know my position on this. Do I have an EV in the driveway, or is that an EV sitting behind you in the garage?
Yeah, it is.
Totally. It's got a battery in it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't run though.
Yeah. Huh.
Weird. But that being said, the point is with gas cars, there's an inherent risk to anything that you're driving, right? When you go out and drive, your car
driving is a risk.
Driving itself is a risk. And you are driving on, 18 gallons of combustible fluid.
It's the biggest weapon that a person can own legally.
That's a good point. That's what
a teacher told me one time.
And that's something I think they should teach in road safety more often, too. So, hey, don't go anywhere. Let's do a quick bonus, a really quick one after the radio show here. But thanks for listening to the radio show. You can catch this show as a podcast wherever fine shows and this one are downloaded. Remember to give it a rating on Spotify. Brian, thank you for joining me on this edition of Automotive ADHD.
Thank you, Matt.